To celebrate the new Bon Iver album coming out, I thought I would go and recreate one of the classic songs from his first record, Forever Ago. And after a few hours of messing around with it, here's what I was able to come up with. So yeah, let's just jump into what the track sounds like. So the first thing that I noticed about this track is something that you will undoubtedly know if you're a Bon Iver fan or if you have ever tried to play along with this song before with your guitar. But the whole song is actually pitched down, like it's about 30 cents down. Here it is with it. And here it is without. I read a couple of interviews. I heard that they were trying to make a digital record that sounded like an analog record, and sometimes pitching things down can be a way to emulate the sort of decay or degradation that you get from using like a tape machine. And that aged degradation really helps this feel like an old folk record. Another thing that I think is kind of important for getting this track to sound in the ballpark of the original is using a lot of tape stuff and a lot of tube stuff. And what I mean by that is using tube compressors, like this is an LA3A that I'm using all the time, and then stuff like virtual tape machine, just to try to add some character to it, because we're kind of trying to do what they were doing for this record. This record was recorded on Pro Tools in a cabin somewhere, and they made a lot of decisions of how do we make this not feel like a cold digital record. You can emulate that by just using tape machine plugins. If you are going to use this specific one, I do recommend turning down the bass alignment all the way down, or some kind of tube or optical compressor. I should say optical as well, because this is an optical compressor. But you can see if I load this compressor into Plugin Doctor, there's a pretty substantial high-end cut here. Not enough to where all the brightness disappears, but enough to where it just feels a tiny bit darker. A digital record is going to capture all of this like bright high-end and pristine quality. So in order to make it sound more folksy or acoustic, using plugins that lean a little bit on the darker side can help. And I think another thing that makes this track come alive is using a room reverb. So I'm just using this Valhalla Vintage Verb preset, but if we solo it, it sounds like this. Using something like a small room is gonna gel all the different elements together and really help get the feeling that like this was like a live band recorded in a cabin, even though, again, it wasn't. It was recorded one instrument at a time. There were overdubs done after the cabin, but adding a little bit of room reverb just makes everything come together a little bit nicer. All right, so now let's start looking at individual elements inside of the track. The first one we'll look at are these acoustic guitars. So some notable things about this guitar sound is, first of all, I kind of cheated. This isn't actually the acoustic sound that I would go for if I was trying to replicate the acoustic on Forever Ago. But I feel like when people are quoting like this album and like the acoustic guitar sound on this record, this is the acoustic guitar tone I feel like they're actually talking about. On this specific song, it's like really high and sort of chimey and scooped in the mids. But I thought I would just use this as a way to record this acoustic guitar sound, because you kind of approach it in the opposite way that most people are taught how to record acoustic guitar. Most people are taught you record acoustic guitars to be big and full-bodied. You pick the most resonant, vibrant one that you can find, and then you get a balance between the sound hole and the neck and try to find a place of balancing brightness and body. And on this record, it was completely different. They chose a completely destroyed, used old Silvertone guitar that had an anemic amount of low end in it. It was like more of a papery acoustic. And instead of recording the microphone here to get a balance between high end and low end, in interviews, Justin Vernon says they actually mic'd it around here to try to get some of the weird edge resonance stuff. So you end up getting this papery guitar sound that sounds really hollow and weird and resonant in a certain way. But if you're looking to replicate the acoustic guitar sound on something like Skinny Love, that is how I would get that sound. Also, when you're playing these low chunky chords, sometimes I noticed when I was playing it on like my really nice acoustics, like the action was too felt good. It felt like everything was really stable and nothing was really out of whack. And so what I ended up doing was tuning my acoustic down 2 whole steps. So that's 4 semitones, and then capoing it up higher on the neck just so I could play those same chords, but they had a little bit more of like a spank to them. Like I didn't want that really taut string sound that you get on like country records. I wanted to get something sort of disgusting and scrapey and slappy. And again, this is with the pitch shifter on, so if I turn them off, so the next sound that we have is this slide guitar here. As you can see, I am not the best slide player in the world, so I did comp some takes. But I used a telly on this because when I listened to the original track, it had a lot of twang in it, and I wanted to replicate that sort of almost country vibe. I actually have like a slide guitar that I could have used, but it sounded a little too dark. This one felt like it needed a little bit more twang on it, so I used the bridge pickup on this Telecaster, and that kind of got me in the range that I was looking for. Also, if you are struggling to play slide stuff on a guitar that is not made for slide, literally setting it down on your lap and like playing it like this, it can work sometimes. You will probably get a lot more fret buzz than you should, but if your guitar has like decently high action and you're using some tighter strings, you can get away with it. Another thing that's cool about this slide guitar is it's kind of acting as like a counter melody to the trumpets that we will be looking at later, but it's sort of gliding around on this meter, which we'll then see later on kind of blends in and out with the trumpets. A really important part of this guitar tone is the spring reverb. So I just used the Neural DSP Imperial Mark II. So this is what it just sounds like with that. You can hear it's kind of like a shaky tone. I have noticed that if I'm like not super confident on the note, kind of like shaking it a little bit more and getting a vibrato on it, it can sometimes save a take because you don't need to like play it perfectly on the note. And I have used like auto-tune on slide 4. I know people probably hate that, but sometimes in order to get it to like go to the note that you want it to go to, and you don't have time to learn how to play perfect slide guitar or hire a session players, you'll just make do. But yeah, you can tell, super basic guitar tone, nothing fancy about it. I then threw on some spring reverb. And spring reverb is the thing that is just always going to add that twang. Like, there is no replacement for it. It is just a part of that aesthetic. On most of the individual elements, I ended up throwing on a little bit of like tape machine on them just to round them out a bit. And then I did a little bit of EQ and some compression after the fact. And all of this is to create a slide that has that twanginess to it, but is also really consistent and is sort of dynamically reacting to the reverb. So another thing that I think is kind of crazy about this song is either there is no bass or the bass is so low that you just can't hear it at all. There might be some subtle upright in the background, but for the most part, there isn't actually anything filling out that like low end. So I just took this guitar with the same patch and I threw it on here. Just to sort of fill out that like low mid-range, but for the most part, I could have just like let some of the low end of the guitars a little bit more in, and I probably wouldn't even need that layer. But yeah, for whatever creative decision, they decided that they weren't going to use a bass on it. So either that or they buried it in the mix. And now we are going to look at these horn layers. So this is just using the orchestral trumpet inside of Contact. Something I found that really helps getting this kind of sound is, first of all, turning it to legato, making sure you're on solo trumpet so you can actually like control and arrange an individual trumpet instead of like an ensemble. And then setting dynamic mode to mod wheel and really just gliding this thing up and down as you're performing, because it really makes a difference. You can see on this trumpet, I'm messing with the mod so much because that kind of allows me to get texture on notes and keep it from sounding the same the whole way through. So here's this solo trumpet. To be fair, it sounds really dinky on its own, but when you combine that with another trumpet that's playing different notes and you're harmonizing with each other and it has a completely separate MIDI performance going on, you can kind of get away with it. I'm honestly of the opinion that most of the time hiring a trumpet player for something like this would be best, because I think that horns are just one of those things where sample libraries haven't really caught up to just a really good session player. You can see on the mixing side, we just darkened it up a ton and added some virtual tape machine to give them some color. And then we have these stepped trumpets down here, which is just like thirds going down. I was going to do this whole separate tracks thing here just for these guys, but it's just one track, so I think I put it in regular MIDI mode and played it in. Next, we have the drums. So here, let me turn off all the effects and reverb. It sounds like this. I literally just chose the first kick and snare in Superior Drummer that I thought fit. I was looking for something a little bit brighter and thwackier on the snare, and something that's a little bit more like throaty on the kick drum. Like not something that reached all the way down, but almost like a, like you can sing a tone in it. After that, just did a little bit of EQ, some tape saturation again. These drums are so minimal that it's almost better to just let them be and like not do a whole lot with them. I did put a little bit of compression on the output, but you can see that there's like barely anything happening. And then those mixed with the room reverb on them. You can also hear I didn't fully quantize them as I was playing the MIDI in. Felt like it was more important to have it feel natural than trying to correct everything. So I think these are only corrected like 80% or 70%. So when you're doing that and you're programming drum MIDI, you really gotta like make sure you're performing something that's at least a semblance of what you're trying to get. And sometimes you have to just do multiple takes of MIDI. So those are all of the elements in the track, except for this one thing here at the bottom. I really felt like tracks like this do well to have a sort of studio ambience in them. So if I solo it, stuff like that, that's sort of like a textural thing, I feel like is really important, because then when I run my mastering chain, that little subtle bit of like noise floor gets brought up in the mix. And right now it's like a really quiet file and I have it at like negative 18 dB. Adding a little bit of like white noise in the background, whether it's a field recording that you've recorded yourself or if you find like a sample pack or something like that, I think that that really makes tracks like these work really well. I did not record vocals for this one. I just didn't have time to do it, but I would say that most of it is recording them on a very dark mic like this. Justin does have kind of like a darker vocal tone, but he is kind of singing like an octave up here. So I think you can probably get pretty decent results with a dynamic microphone. I know that it is like a myth that he used a 57 for this whole record, but with this kind of vocal mix, I feel like you could get away with it. And after like dissecting it, I feel like if you were to track vocals on something like this, you would want, like I said, some kind of vocal chain that's not crazy compressed, maybe has a little bit more of an optical compression feel, so like some LA2As and stuff like that. And then it's just going to be mainly how much you double it. 2 doubles on the left and 2 doubles on the right, and then every once in a while bring in a harmony that's also double tracked left and right. But yeah, with all that stuff together, it sounds like this. If you enjoyed this kind of dissection, hit subscribe and like and all that stuff. I'm putting out these videos all the time. And yeah, I will see you guys next week.